Geoff's graphics and his artwork that went on my boards, it was paralleling what we were going and, what we were going through in snowboarding, like we were
Yeah.
pushing boundaries style-wise, tricks-wise, personality-wise, and Geoff was really pushing the graphics to be on the forefront of that. I mean, I was really, really stoked to have my name be associated with any of that. I still am.
Welcome to Going Off, a podcast about snowboard history.
As the early days of snowboard culture slide into the past, we're documenting its oral history.
We're tracing back what made it so strange and explosive, why it changed all those lives and still bonds people for life.
From the history of snowboard fashion to how halfpipes were born,
From the birth of jibbing to movies, music, and magazines.
each episode drops in on something new. I'm one of your hosts, Tricia Burns.
And I'm your other host, Jennifer Shurowski. We've traveled the world together for decades, riding and just living the way of life we call snowboarding. And now we're ready to get in the Wayback Machine. I think we're recording now.
Let's fucking go off.
Oh man, I don't know what's going on.
All right, so here we are. What do you want to talk about today, Jen?
We are here to talk about snowboard graphic art again, which is such a fun topic. We're going to spotlight some specific and really important graphics from snowboarding's early years today, because just hearing the story behind really pivotal graphics is such an interesting way to kind of like peer into snowboard history and culture and understand what was going on at that time and kind of like the arc. And if you are a hardcore going off head, you will probably remember our second episode ever covered the snowboard, what we were calling the snowboard graphics revolution, which kind of took a bird's eye look at the development of snowboard graphics in a way. So go back and listen to that if you haven't. But we couldn't get to them all in that episode. Like, how could you ever? There's so many.
Yeah.
So we're diving back in.
Yeah, and so this episode, we're going to go a little bit behind the scenes with an OG Canadian snowboarder, Jon Boyer, and his Pro Model series that he had on Barfoot, which was out in the early 90s. These graphics were done by Geoff McFetridge. He is a super talented artist who has risen to fame way beyond snowboarding. But back then, he was Boyer's skate homie, a neighborhood friend back in Calgary, Alberta, where they both grew up.
Yeah. We had a super fun conversation with both of them. We talked about a lot of stuff, like how they were looking at, who were their influences, like how they were looking towards sort of the character-driven approaches of legendary skater artists like Neil Blender and Mark Gonzalez, and they were getting excited about that. Also, we talked about like how dynamic that time in snowboarding was, just because it was truly like at its inception, and it was the Wild West. Like, it was
Totally.
really kids just making shit. And then just fascinating process stuff. Like, McFetridge was a really early adopter of Mac computers, so he's wielding that tool in a time when kind of like no one else is. So really making things stand out in that way.
Yeah, and so to put this, ground this in time and why these graphics are so important, Boyer's boards were really some of the first pro model graphics, just one season after Sean Palmer's famous clown board, to kind of kick off with what we're calling like that pro model age, where boards started to really become an expression of the individual's personality. So really, it was, in the past, we had kind of seen boards that were more in the vein of like that surfboard style, and they were branded, particularly like you think about like the Burton Mountain or the Barfoot Claw or the Sims Shield, so it was just, and a lot of like neon and just lines and logos, really. And so this was one of the first pro models where you're taking more of like a signature, like a look at the human versus just, there were boards like Sims, Terry Kidwell Pro Model, but that was really felt more like a signature model. And, Boyer's boards really represented Boyer.
Yeah, totally. Like Kidwell's board, if you look at it against the rest of the Sims line, it really like mimicked those graphics and had those same colors. Signature model is a great way to put it. It had his name on it, but it wasn't like I'm Terry Kidwell, and this is what I'm about. So it's changing and it's shifting during this period, and Boyer's board is really like on the cutting edge of that. So this is the fall of 1992 when Boyer's board first dropped. So it's for the 92-93 season. This is the same fall that only a few other iconic graphics in this vein dropped. Like it's obviously Palmer's second gen board. So the next year he's got a board that is really similar to the one that dropped the year before, that's got like the American flag and such. And then Jeff Brushy's trout board that had like the skeleton, bright orange skeleton of the fish on the base. That one is dropping this same year with Boyer's boards, and those are kind of the ones to just have this new ethos about them. And it
Yeah.
was funny. I was DMing with Robbie Sell, who's super awesome. He was a pro snowboarder in kind of late 90s, 2000s period. And he was saying, he was remembering back to being a young skater in Tahoe, getting into snowboarding, and he was coveting Boyer's board. And he was just saying, like,
That's cool.
I would go into the snowboard shop and I was just looking for anything that had personality. Like, that's what he was looking for, because he's
Yeah.
coming from, like, he's looking at what's going on in skateboarding, which actually we talked about this with Geoff, was like pretty sophisticated what was going on in skating at that time in terms of like board graphics and branding and that sort of thing. So he was coveting Boyer's board, but he was saying, he's like, oh, I just ended up having to get some like generic knockoff because it wasn't in the budge, and that's how it goes. But let's quickly rip through the boards themselves and
Yeah.
describe them so that we kind of know what we're talking about when we start on with Geoff and Jon. So Boyer
Yeah.
had 4 boards with Barfoot. They're all designed by Geoff McFetridge. They span the course of 3 seasons.
Yeah, and that first one, like you said, dropped in the fall of 92 for the 93 season. And what we're going to call like the sledgehammer board. It has this caricature of Boyer with like flaming red hair, this sort of sinister, cartoonish character carrying a giant sledgehammer that has a Barfoot claw on the face of the hammer. But then also on the top of the top sheet, it shows him smashing down on this strength tester. And the top is like the carnival, like ding, ding, dinger is the giant
Yeah.
Barfoot claw. And then on the bottom of the board, it's kind of like showcasing this like twin tip version, and one side is sort of like it's like a mirror image of this sinister sort of clown like character that is, some representation of Jon Boyer. And
Yeah.
so that's the first one. That's like the big groundbreaker that, arrives in that same season as Brushy's trout board. So then the next year, Boyer had 2 pro models. He has a freestyle and a freeride board. The freestyle, like jib/pipe board, was this angel devil board. It's black and white. It has like sketched pen and ink quality, and it shows Boyer's character with like a halo and then like a dark shadow on it. So again, it feels like this like Jekyll and Hyde kind of vibe. And the bottom, the tips and tail of the board again have this Barfoot logo, and one has like a halo and the other has devil horns. And then the middle is this 2-sided face of like evil and angel, or, kind of like, again, the Jekyll and Hyde vibe. One other thing I want to say about that board is that this good and evil board, that's a 157, which is crazy that that's a freestyle board. It feels
I know.
really big to
Yeah,
me.
the boards were
They were
bigger.
just
It
bigger.
seems like,
Yeah.
yeah, because you were saying that the Astro Boyer was what, a 62?
It's a
Is that what you said?
162. Yeah. So that other
Yeah,
board that came out at the same year is a 162. So 2 different models, but both gigantic.
yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. So let's talk about the Astro Boyers. This board is super colorful and vibrant. The Boyer caricature that we've been talking about, he now has a jetpack on, and he's kind of burst out of a television. So you see a sort of television that's like fallen over with like a shattered screen, and he's got like his fist up like he's a superhero, and he's flying through the sky, and he's got a signet ring on, and the ring has the Barfoot logo on it. The top sheet has these 3-dimensional coins, or they kind of look like tokens. So I feel like nodding back to that carnival theme a little
Yeah.
bit. And then finally, Boyer's last board, we're calling the high roller board, which was more minimal and looks a little different than the other boards. But The top sheet's sort of white tonal. It's got a kind of retro Vegas vibe going on. It has these like kind of mid-century style stars on it. And the base has this, we were thinking of it almost as like a Shaft movie poster inspired
Yeah.
graphic where there's, you can see the Boyer characters in there with other kind of in the mix with like other people and concepts and things. There's like dice that are getting rolled, and on the bottom it says "Live in Large." So that graphic takes us into the mid '90s.
For those of you who aren't familiar with Jon Boyer, he was a second generation Canadian pro snowboarder. So he's rising to pro model status like at the crack of the 90s and looking up to those first generation guys like Ken Achenbach, Neil DeFern, Don Schwartz, like that
Yeah.
first generation that we would call of like early Canadian rock stars and legends. But John was an early style pioneer and he had like a seismic impact, especially on that Canadian scene. He was really instrumental in those early days, and kind of brought his sponsor Barfoot along with him into that new school approach to snowboarding. So it didn't get stuck in that like 80s kind of neon vibe, like, hey, people are wearing flannels and chain wallets and we should get ahead of the curve and be like a little bit more skate driven. And he also was like a really cool story is that he kind of scouted Devin Walsh and like he knew that Devin was way talented and wanted to start a new school sub brand with Barfoot and then like keep Barfoot as the classic original brand. And he wanted Devin to be the heart of that program. But the idea got axed and Boyers ended up moving on to other stuff.
Yeah, Dano, Pendygrasse, who's legendary Canadian photographer, friend of the show. He was just saying Boyer is kind of like he's always been kind of a little ahead of the curve and has a good eye and stuff. So, anyway, back to like who's Boyer? They used to call him Jon Boyer. So I was asking about him about this because I was like, who's the first person that called you that? I mean, I think it's sort of obvious what it means. He was really young when he kind of came to pro model status. He was like 17 and he went big. So Boyer, but he was trying to remember. He was like, I can't remember. And then he was saying, I think it might have been someone at Trans World Snowboarding magazine, like maybe it was Kevin Kinnear, who was the editor. It might have been like Guy Motil, who's a photographer. So obviously the media is looking for a great story. They start calling him Boyer and then it sticks. But he said that he hated the name, at least in retrospect, looking back on it. So, which is classic. And then there has been talk that this Boyer Pro model, the first one to drop in the fall of '92, that this was the first Canadian pro model, essentially. And he was the first Canadian to have a pro model. This is actually inaccurate. Again, Dano was reminding us that actually Ken Achenbach, who, he's kind of a mammoth figure in Canadian snowboarding.
Yeah.
And he started the Snowboard Shop, one of snowboarding's very first snowboard shops, aptly named. And he had his name on a couple boards, Dano was reminding us, in kind of the year or two prior. So this brand, Crazy Banana, which is an Austrian brand. I would love to dig into why it's named Crazy Banana. Like, did they just like...
It looks like a banana and it's crazy.
Okay, you nailed it. Anyway, that brand had a board called the Voodoo that had Ken's name on it. So that's probably, technically the first Canadian pro model. But it was more in the vein of that signature model, like you were talking about with Terry Kidwell, where it wasn't like, this is Ken and this is what I'm about. It was really like Crazy Banana branded and then just had his signature on the bottom. So Boyer's board really does represent the first Canadian pro model that was a pro model in the true sense of what would come to define that in the 90s, when the brands are sort of using pros to sell their boards in terms of like their personality, their interests, their aesthetics, kind of like a precursor to how it is now with like influencers and things like that.
Yeah, or they're taking the whole board to kind of showcase what their rider is about. They're using that as a canvas.
Totally, not just slapping a name on it.
Yeah, exactly. Also, Ken Achenbach started that summer camp up
Camp of
in
Champions.
No, not Camp of Champs. Is it Camp of Champs?
Well, he ran that for a
Oh,
really
you're
long
right.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. Camp of Champs. I always get it confused with Craig Kelly's summer snowboard camp. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
That is a
anyway,
great call out because he ran that forever.
and I think just to give Ken Achenbach another little shout out is he brought up a lot of he like was the godfather of Canadian snowboarding.
Yeah.
He was an early just cultivator of the scene.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, and we did wanna just call these out because, it was during this time, it wasn't necessarily global. We've talked about this. It was quite
Yeah.
a regional thing. So, it wasn't always what was going on in Canada wasn't always like filtering out to the US in terms of like the magazine Snowboard Canada and stuff wasn't like at the grocery
Was it
store where I grew
landing
up.
in Vail or in
Yeah.
Connecticut?
So although some I think snowboarders today might not know who Jon Boyer is, he was, he had a high profile and was quite like impactful at the time.
Yeah. And so currently, now Boyer was super creative in his own right. And when his pro days were done, heading into the late 90s, he naturally shifted into the other side of the lens, shooting photography and eventually film. And now he's a big time screenwriter and director living in Los Angeles.
Yep. And the artist, Geoff McFetridge, he's gone on to do so much cool shit. He art directed the Beastie Boys magazine, Grand Royal magazine. This was back in the day. He had just moved to LA and he was working under my former boss and mentor, Mark Luman, who is such a legend and so brilliant. And anyway, Geoff has worked in movies. He collabed with Spike Jonze a couple times. Like he worked on that film Her with Joaquin Phoenix. He did kind of all like the graphic interfaces that are on the AI because, Joaquin Phoenix ends up like dating the AI, which is very prescient for now.
Totally.
And he did stuff like design titles for, the Virgin Suicides and things like that. And he works a lot in the outdoor world now too. He just did a big project with Sunbum you probably saw around.
Yeah. And Boyer and Geoff are neighbors in LA now. So everything's kind of come full circle.
Maybe we should just let you kind of start and bring it in. I don't know how you guys what you do, but
well, we should introduce ourselves, Geoff. We've never met. I'm Jen. That's Trish. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for joining us.
We both known Jon for a hot minute. I can't wait. Trisha's got a great story about the first time she met Boyer.
oh,
But
God.
maybe Boyer, you could start by just telling us a little bit about the opportunity. Like, when did the golden mantle get put upon you? Like, you're going to get a pro model, you get to do the graphics. Like, talk a little bit about that. Like, if you remember.
Yeah, I do remember. It was I don't remember exactly the year. I'm so bad with years, but I do.
91.
Yeah, it was like
1990-ish.
91. I remember I was pretty young. Palmer had just got his model. It was just released right before mine. They were talking to me about doing one, and they put out this random thing. It was just this board with no graphics, and they just put my name on it. I said, "Wait a minute, I had nothing
It
to do
had
with this."
graphics. They were questionable.
They were
basic.
90s awful. And I said, listen, I want to do my own. I wanted this whole skate style thing. And Geoff and we knew each other back in Calgary. We were kids skateboarding together. And we did a skate zine, me and him and a couple other friends. What was it? Straight Ahead? Is that what we called it?
Straight Ahead. Yeah.
Straight Ahead, which
That's
is like,
awesome.
is this a straight edge magazine? We're like, no, I don't know where the name.
Well, it was a straight edge magazine. Started by Hubert C., who was way ahead of his time, and he was really into the DC scene, and it was straight edge hardcore. But then he was like, "Do you want to have a section that was like skate, like the skate section?" And then we just took it over.
And then it became yours. Oh, interesting. Huh.
Yeah. And so Geoff was always this amazing artist. Like, we'd go over to your house and we would draw, and I would get really mad because I wanted to be an artist, but I sucked and he was really good. And I just copied what he was drawing. And anyway, so
I was in a hurry, John. We didn't have the patience.
I didn't have the patience.
Yeah, I could
which
see
is
that.
great for becoming a pro snowboarder. But
I guess I had that sort of ginger impatience about me, but I didn't like what Barfoot was kind of doing. They were kind of a weird company, but like at the time it was kind of this cool, a little bit more, this kind of core company that stood apart from like the Burtons and the Sims, and I really liked that. But so they finally agreed they were going into this new type of manufacturing with what was it called, Geoff? If you remember the top sheets, it was like sublimation or something. It was this
Sublimation, yeah.
sublimation, this
I'd be
process where they
curious, what do you know do you know what the factory was where they were making those boards?
I
Taylor Dykem or elsewhere?
Yes,
it
it
was
was Taylor
probably
Decker.
Taylor Dykem.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it
Yes.
was. And so they said that we can do this sort of, photo real kind of quality image. And that really excited me. So I went to Geoff and said, listen, I'm getting this pro model. I want to do this graphic. And I didn't really know what I wanted it to be. I just knew at the time I collected yo-yos, which is weird. I always had
Oh,
a yo-yo
funny.
in my pocket in lift lines, and I would do yo-yo tricks. Very early 90s, cool, right?
That's so funny.
So Geoff just kinda took that and a little bit of my personality, and you kinda came up with it more than anything, Geoff. If I remember, like, I remember you called
Yeah.
and said, I have a first rough drawing, why don't you come over and look at it? And I remember it just blew me away.
Well, I mean, spirit of the time was like you would have like in skateboarding, like the boards that were popular would have like an iconic quality. So I really was making like a little
Okay.
character out of you. And
Yeah,
then it was like there's like a long history in skateboarding. I don't know how much it had to do with the guys, but if you were like I guess it's like Gons had like these sort of characters and all the
Yeah.
people
yeah,
we looked up to, like Neil Blender, Gons, they were
yeah,
sort of character based. And then so like I made this little character that was you, and
yeah.
you were like this wild guy and you had this big hammer. But so, like, you had a big hammer though, because I've struggled with like the problem with snowboards is they're really long and skinny.
Yeah.
And I knew what we wanted to do something that was like skate oriented. So like a picture. And
Yeah,
so I didn't want any dead zone. So I made him hammering this, like the thing at the county fair where you hit the
ringing the
thing, the
bell.
sword thing, rings the bell, and the logo's the bell. And then there's this
Yeah,
wacky thing. So it's just being like funky, like a funky
yeah.
guy with a big hammer.
Yeah, and that's what it was. It was this weird thing, and I guess it just captured my sense of, you know, I talked a lot,
Energy.
and, I had a lot of energy, and I was super hyper, and yeah, and so Geoff really captured that, and I do remember, like, the first pencil drawing he had of it, or it was pencil and ink, I can't remember, but I don't think he
It was
had
just
it
pencil.
colored yet, and I went over to his house, and I saw it, and I was just like I was so excited. Because A, I was gonna have a board with this on it, my name and everything, but it was just my friend who did the art. It was, and it felt really
Beautiful.
personal to me. So then when it was completely done and I saw the first board come off the press with the color and how much it popped, I was it was literally like the best year of my life at that time. It was really personal and really cool, and people really dug it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and the rest it kinda went
We
from there.
Did you have a lot of like, Jeff, do you remember getting feedback from John, or it was just like, "Love it, let's go with it?" Or, like, how much time was the turnaround? Because I feel like with other, early snowboards are like, "Oh, we need a graphic by, I don't know, Monday. You got it?"
No, it was I mean, I was in art school at the time, so I sort of knew what I was doing to some degree. I also had worked at like my summer job was to work at like a sunscreen factory. So I knew about printing to a degree that like I think even at the time I didn't know like how much I knew, but I knew how to do separations. I knew how to like deliver camera ready artwork. Um, so I think the deadline was pretty outrageous, but there wasn't any like there was no way to like I don't know. I showed it to you, John. I think the most important thing was like for John to like it. I know I did a small
Yeah,
sketch, which I feel like I found, but it's like a very small sketch that just shows like this is like what the guy looks like and this is the concept and then like maybe type style or something, how I wrote your name.
right.
And then, but I don't know if we faxed it. It was definitely era of fax, but probably that drawing I then
Facts.
faxed to California.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And someone maybe saw it or I don't, this was pretty early. Like I definitely had like a child's mind. Like even though all this said like professionalism, like I definitely had a child's mind.
Yeah.
So I don't
Which I
know.
still have.
Me
I
too.
do too. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. It's sort of permanent.
Yeah, the
Um,
thing that really bums me out the most about the whole thing is that I never kept the original artwork. It just sort of disappeared like everything
Yeah.
else did back in those days,
well,
and Hold on.
Yeah,
What? What?
well,
Geoff has
no,
it.
I don't think you ever
He's
had
like,
it.
"Look at this."
I have 2 well, that's like not an anecdote, but, like, the one that it connects was that I made the artwork full size. So
Like life size of the board.
life size, and I
Yeah,
don't
like
know, or
it
maybe
was
it was
to
like
scale for the board. Yeah, it was.
I
It was
think it
to
was to
scale to the
scale
board
to the
because
board.
it was 2 pieces that you attached together. I remember it folded out like a gatefold, and I remember just
Yeah,
being like, looking at it, just I think I even laid it down on the ground, so I stood by like, over it, like, what it would feel like being on it, and
Yeah.
I was
yeah,
so excited about it.
and I think that's because I got sent like, I was like, "I need a template because the board shapes were changing." It was a really specific shape. And so
Mhm.
I got the template, and it was just a life size thing, and I didn't know how to shrink it. Like, there was no way to be safely shrink it down, right? Like, so as
Mm.
much as I knew, like, just technologically, I mean, still it would be hard to do, without, like, a digital file, without a version.
Yeah.
So I did it full size, and the anecdote is I had like so where we grew up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, was an oil town, and all these oil companies were going out of business. So we actually grew up at a time when the economy was awful, and with tons of our friends' dads were losing their jobs, and it was like this terrible time actually in Calgary. So like my dad one day is like, "Yeah, this place they're getting rid of all these drafting tables,"
Oh,
which got the
cool.
oil companies. So he brought me home. I had a home studio because we lived in like the suburbs, so like we both of us lived in these sort of tract homes with like empty basements. So I
Yeah.
had this big professional drafting table that could fit a snowboard. So I was working on the snowboard and it was pen and ink. And the way those drafting tables work is they have a setting that's vertical and it's a switch. So when I was almost done the artwork, middle of the night, somehow I hit the switch and the thing went boom. And like it just does it instantly, like they're spring loaded and it went vertical and poured ink all over it like hard. Did you ever know
No
that?
You know,
way.
I don't
So I had to
remember
do the
that.
whole thing again. I had to do the
Oh
Uh,
whole thing
god.
again. But that's it. That also reminded me then that artwork, because it was life size and there was no way, like also photographing it, I sent it. So it went to Taylor Dykema in some big and like it like there's no way. There's no other way to do it. Like there like
Yeah.
it
yeah.
could have been shot with a camera in Calgary and a film sent, but I didn't know how to do that. So
So you would
Yeah.
have to
I
send it in a box that was that size, or could you roll it?
it was on yeah, no, it was on illustration board, which is like a hard
Yeah.
board.
Okay.
So it would have been folded into 2 pieces and put in like a piece of cardboard and shipped.
and hope that it
Um,
didn't get ruined.
and
And I don't
just
know if
and
I don't know
hope.
if they drum scanned it or what they did,
Yes.
what the process
And then
is that what they
they
did? They
drum
drum scanned it
well,
because
no, they didn't. They just shot like because to part 2 of our story, this was not a digital process. So that
Yeah.
was then shot on film and the separate so I did notations for the color. So I noted this is gonna be this color, this is gonna be this color, like you would do for a t-shirt. And so then they cut the film. It would be hand cut rubyless to print the film. So those boards were silk screened. They were just silk screened huge. They would do huge like you would do a skateboard.
Crazy.
Right.
Like on the backside. As far as I know.
Yeah,
and
we did, one of our early episodes told this story of what we were calling the snowboard graphics revolution, which was kind of in the 90s because things were shifting and changing so much. And we were, talking to Lance Violetto, who's snowboard graphics god, and he was talking about sublimation and how much that opened up sort of the process because you could just throw art directly on the board. But it also kind of opened up the door for a bunch of shitty graphics too, because like remember, like you'd walk into a bar and there'd be like a board with like a Bud Light logo on it or
oh
something,
yeah.
It's just like
Well,
kind of made
the
it.
rip-off graphics era of the '90s
Yeah.
was huge too, and but the cool thing, the thing that was stoked me out the most about, especially just coming from that era of snowboarding, is everything was changing.
Yeah.
Palmer, I'll give kudos to Palmer. He was the first one out of any of us to have a skate style graphic on his board that
Yeah.
didn't look like a ski. Like every other graphic had this sort of ski type design element to it that we were trying so hard to depart ourselves from because we were the punks, we were the stepchild of the snow sports industry and of the snow sports world. And so I don't remember if I knew Palmer's if his board had come out yet, when I was working on mine, or if I saw it and I said, I want to do something like that. But, you know, I think Palmer and I were the first two, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. I don't really remember, but I think that Palmer's board, his clown board and my hammer board were the first two like real skate style graphics in snowboarding, maybe. I d I don't
Well,
know,
what
but
happened was, like, you're totally right in that Palmer's launched the year before, and that really just changed everything because it was about, I'm going to make this graphic a sort of a reflection of my personality, not about
Yeah.
yeah,
branding. Like, if you think of like the early Barfoot graphics are all, it's the claw, and it's
yeah,
not about like who the rider is.
Yeah, and the inspiration was everyone was, like, pulling from skateboarding, so it's like, yeah,
yeah.
like,
Well,
East Coast, West Coast, Canada, whatever, yeah.
that's all we wanted to be is we wanted to be like skateboarders.
Yeah, like, I think it's like it didn't ever felt like we were pushing back against anything. It was never like, "We're gonna be against anything." It was just, like, felt
Yeah.
very natural. It was like,
Yeah.
"Well,
Mhm.
if given this shape, what would you do?" Like, you didn't need to see what anybody else was doing or, like, it wasn't like, I was definitely not aware of what was happening.
You weren't
Um,
going like, all right, what else is out there? We need to make
yeah,
ourselves distinct. You were like, let's do what's
yeah,
cool. Our people will
yeah.
find
You
us.
kind
And
of wouldn't know either unless you were, like, out on the hill seeing those, like, early models, right? Like, up at Hood and seeing, like, a Palmer's
Yeah,
next year's model, you know, with your next
and
year's model next to it kinda thing.
you didn't and what happened was right after that, I remember the first action sports trade show when all of a sudden, I think it was the one I can't remember if it was one in Vegas or the one in Long Beach, but the first real, like, skate style influenced vibe hit the snowboarding industry that, you know, like, it exploded, just like you said, there was Noah's board, and everybody started doing graphics, like real graphics that gave personality to the sport rather than us just sort of blending in with snow sports in general, like, um and I remember I it was probably Vegas because everybody called it the snowboard ghetto. I remember you'd go over by where
yeah,
all the snowboard booths were, and it was just
In
parties
the
and
corner.
DJs and loud, and we were shoved off into the corner, and all these boards were popping up with the graphics, and then, you know, shortly after is when the big company surge happened, when there's
right.
all these little pop-up companies, and I was actually gonna do one within within Barfoot, and it never came to fruition, but I remember, like, the ski industry being really freaked out by us because we were just so loud and boisterous
Different.
and different and just sort of pushing against the norms, which was really exciting to be a part of, you know, because snowboarding now is doesn't really reflect what it was back then, and I'm probably
It's
getting
just in
ahead
a
of myself
different
Yeah.
with that,
place.
but
Yeah.
it's in a
Mhm.
very
Yeah.
different place, you know,
It's just
but,
broader and less, like, niche, and it speaks to so many more, like, a variety of people, and
yeah,
there's less risk or less, it seems like, right? Like, things are a little more, like, recycled and chill and not so,
it's
like,
very
splashy. Yeah.
I think recycled is probably a really good, you know, word to describe it, and my view, I don't wanna say anything to get myself in trouble, but,
Don't old
going back
man out on us, John.
Just
going
kidding.
back to the
You're in
yeah,
the
no,
right room.
I'm not gonna get off my lawn you yet, but going back to the graphics, and I do remember, like, Jeff, you were tapping into, you know, going from the silk screen graphics, and then I think the Astro Boyer board, I correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the first true digital graphic that you ever did, or
Well, that's yeah,
Oh,
that's the
interesting.
second part of the story of the
oh, okay,
disasters
there
of making
Oh,
boards
keep
for Jon
going on your
Boyer.
disaster
Yeah,
story because
so
the
the
Astro
first one
Warrior was third, right?
yeah.
right, but that was
Yes.
Astro
Okay.
Boyer was it made simultaneous like, basically, there were 2 seasons.
Oh.
I kinda had 2 boards come out at once.
You had 2 boards at the same time. So,
Yeah,
like,
Oh.
the side that I don't understand is, like, just to, like to go back to, like, what we were just talking about, the industry developing, is that, like, you know, there was, like, Chuck Barfoot, Barfoot Snowboards, was, like, an established guy in Santa Barbara. I don't know much of his history, but he was, like,
He's the
around,
man.
friends with Tom Sins.
Yeah.
He was, like
mhm.
I just in my head, I paint this picture of, like, an able-minded sort of like really clever guy with an engineering background who figured out how to make snowboards. And he's like, oh, Tom Smith is making boards. I can make boards. Like they were like surfy guys,
They grew up
but they
together in New
were,
Jersey and then lived together in Santa Barbara,
Yeah,
just to like add that little
okay,
tidbit
gotcha.
in. But so
yeah,
they were
they
like
were
tight homies and like working together in many ways.
Yeah.
yeah.
But they were like men, right? Who were like, let's find us a wood supplier. They were adults and we were like kids. And so like that were like we were just like kids. They like grew up together. So like they were doing like this sort of work. And then we were like that what they sort of actually needed, like you need them
Yeah.
who like they were making this stuff. It didn't matter who it was for, but it turns out it was for like us. And then they give us control without meeting me or, it was very loose.
Yeah.
And they just hand control of what these boards are going to look like to basically a stranger and a guy who I don't know what your relationship was, but it was probably like limited, which that to me is fascinating, like they had all this
Yeah.
faith or whatever.
And to like
But
trust like, hey, we don't know what's coming for the next generation and like trust these guys that are in that scene and have their finger on the pulse. And like if we hate it, great. That means it's probably gonna succeed.
exactly. And that everyone decided to do that is wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just from my experience also, and to that, like with Chuck and everything, they had a really hard time just going, okay, they let us, but that trust didn't just come like, sure, let's just do it. It took a lot of convincing because, like
Okay.
everybody, they built up these little grassroots companies and done everything themselves, built boards by hand, all the way up to factories, sourcing out manufacturers, and it was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And here's me just coming in, screaming in their ears, "We gotta change, we have to grow, we gotta do this, we gotta make it more like
Yeah.
skate stuff, we gotta," and it's not this hippie, surfy kinda thing anymore, it's this new innovative blah, 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 and so that was a bit of a challenge, and then they finally just said, "Okay, let's, fuck it, let's go for it," and yeah, what and then in comes Geoff and other artists and everything, and a lot of the personality just really started shining in snowboarding because of it.
Yeah, and that like snowboarding it had this like resourcefulness of manufacturing that they get from skiing, but then it had like enough foresight to look at skateboarding or look at BMX or things, culture that had come before, and to use those models and to sort of jumpstart, go fast forward to be like, okay, this is gonna be this youth energy sport. They weren't like cultivating like, what about families and what about
Yeah.
rental programs? And they were just like
Yeah.
young people. Like, let's just make it wild, which I think happened. I don't know. It's circumstantial. Like it's like at the time, like the time it was.
Yeah.
And maybe also they didn't have the foresight to know how much money people made. They were like, wait, we can make $10,000, not like create
Yeah.
these monster companies.
Well,
Um,
also, it felt like it was the rise of the pro model when, you got that board, so
no,
they were bringing in a lot of voices that were the athlete, where, like, now the pro model's basically dead, right? But
Yeah.
then it was like everybody had a pro model, not everybody, but a lot of us, and it was, like, time to put your, like, uniqueness onto that brand, and so it was a
mhm,
cool opportunity to kind of see that, like, especially on your boards, like, you very much feel like, "Oh, this is Jon Boyer's personality without knowing you," and, like, that's such a cool time and opportunity, and I guess it was taken from skateboarding, right, a little bit, like, they had
Yeah.
pro models and still do, that move
yeah,
Yeah.
product.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, it just it did it brought the personality to the sport that
Yeah.
meant everything back then. I think it just, you know, individuality in like because that was the thing with skiing. And I love ski I think skiing's awesome. Back then, we all hated skiers, "Oh, skiers, whatever," but then, you get older and you realize we couldn't have survived without them, and then they couldn't have survived without us at one point, and then now it's sort of leveling out and it's cyclical, but, at the time, we wanted to stand apart, and we were really cutting our teeth with everything from clothing style, hair. Everybody was dyeing their hair different colors, and our boards needed to reflect this.
Yeah, it was like about self-expression.
Yeah, it
and it
was a
was
really
something.
great time.
It was truly like it's rare that something truly new comes along. It's like invented in our time. Like it's our generation. Like
Yeah,
it's our genesis moment where it's like from scratch. We got to watch something turn from like homemade backyard thing into like a cultural, like a sort of a universal cultural thing. One knows what it
yeah,
means. So for us to get to participate in that, and it's like we put our
Yeah.
like so many people imprinted on the culture and the influences were broad and
Yeah.
but like yeah, I think that sort of ground zero quality of it is like really interesting to look back as a case study because I do think like I talk about like there's like points in an evolution you want to be at. Like I think we were really early on in snowboarding, which isn't actually the best time for snowboarding. Like if you flex that board like that the first
Yeah.
Boyer Pro model, like I do
If
not
you
know how
tried
to
to
go that
flex
thing.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Lift
you
it
have to
up. How heavy is it?
do like and go to Japan and enter the big air contest on that thing. Like
Oh
Yeah.
night,
yeah.
like a
Yeah.
total nightmare. And so like when you like anyway, like so to see like it's like the culture, we saw something like very, very early on before all the talons get put in it, like right. And so what we're talking about is like how like how like hear like how these things happen which are circumstantial rather than planned. And so it's like it truly is like a culture growing organically because like Chuck Barfoot didn't have a plan. None of these people had like a plan.
Hell
And
no.
they weren't
Yeah.
like in
No.
sort of like
Chuck never
acting
had a
on
plan.
no, it's not like, well,
Yeah.
this will make money even. Like it wasn't like I think a little bit like, oh, young people, we need
Yeah.
young people to buy these boards, like old people aren't buying them or something. But
No.
it didn't ever feel like a plan. And
It
then
was
the
a
way it
Yeah.
1-year
happened, I think,
plan.
yeah, it was a
I
1 year
think
plan. Like,
I think the only person that had a plan in snowboarding back then was Jake.
Yeah.
And he saw this long game and that's why everybody rebelled so much against Burton back then was because it just felt like a ski company that was calling
yeah,
themselves
because he,
snowboarding because he was following that ideology and that track that skiing had been so successful, this slow growth into this explosive
yes.
sport. And then all of a sudden we came along and
And
fucked it
that's
all
like,
up
and he
in
was,
the best
my
way.
impression, yeah, my impression is he was like vertically integrated. He had his own art
Yeah.
department, he had his own riders, he had his own manufacturing, as opposed
Yeah.
to our world of snowboarding was like skateboard influence. You had a factory, you didn't own the factory. You were just
Yeah.
a room with graphics, salespeople, and someone who started the company who's like a snowboarder.
Yeah.
And that's like
Yeah.
the
Quality
skateboard
control,
model.
what's that? It's
Yeah.
like,
So you might,
yeah,
everybody might be using the same factory, but you're like, but we're not the same because we've got Jon Boyer or whatever.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
But that like, so the second part of the story, like going on to the graphics and was like, they called me after I'd done the one board. I got a call from, and I'm not remembering his name, but there was another person involved. Do you
Greg
remember
DeLeo.
Greg DeLeo? Where is he now? Is he around?
I have no idea. I
Because
literally I'm looking at two of the people that I barely still know in
He'll
snowboarding.
be in the
Like,
comments of this going, I'm
yeah.
still here. No, I'm just kidding.
that
I don't
said,
know.
look,
I hadn't seen him forever, but so yeah, just to step in for just a second, Greg came into Barfoot and he really saw what we were trying to do. And to credit to him, like he was really into like
Okay.
let's push this whole skate thing. So anyways, Geoff, go ahead with
yes, and that's
Thank
why I
you.
say I'm sorry I forgot your name, Greg. But he's the key. He's the person who's like there was somebody, and he lived in Los Angeles, and he probably has an interesting background and had an eye to what was happening and knew what to do with this brand. He was like a consultant before there was consultants or something. He was like a brand
yeah,
director. So
yeah.
he called me and said like, "Would you just do our whole line next year?" Which is hilarious.
Oh, okay.
So like I'm still in college, so I take and I just say yes, and I give him
This
some
was the
crazy
year
number.
after the sledgehammer board?
There might have been a pause. Was it like a full year later?
Yeah,
It was like the
Or in
it
that
was at
zone,
least
but after.
it
yes,
was
right
within a
after.
year or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so like I so it's to do 4 models or 5 models, but then 2 of them were John's. Those are the ones where then I did them like technology, like I learned how to use a Macintosh computer. Like they had come into my school. So then like we had these rudimentary tools, but like
Yeah.
they did work. And so for me, it was like, oh, so I'm going to do these next round of graphics digital, which that's just to John's point of them being the first digital board supposedly ever made was because again, it was like I took it for granted. Like, of course, everyone's probably doing this, or like this is how I would do it. We were just
But it's
acting like we
early for
were.
that, really, right?
But it turns out it was way too early because their computers didn't you had to, you know, in a computer, you build something full size as well, just like the board on my table. But
Yeah.
that means for them, that was actually a really, really big file.
Yeah.
So one of the boards. So anyway, I did them digitally. I would do stuff like my memories, like so I was working in Adobe Illustrator, and people don't know this, but it's still there. But there's a wireframe mode, which is there's no color, it's just the lines. So if there's like a circle, they would just start, it just looks like that, like two circles
Right.
overlapping with just the outline. You can't see what it looks like. You don't know which circle's in front of the other one. So that's how I'd have to work on the file, because if it was in color mode, it would freeze. So I'd work blindly and I'd be like, okay, in front, in front, in front, that's in front of that, front, in front, in front, that's in front of that. And I'd work blind and then hit like preview and go get dinner and then come back. And then
Oh
it would
my
be
gosh.
back. It would take a half hour for that board, the Boyer Super Board, like the Super Boyer, like
Astro
Boyer.
Boyer.
Boy,
Yeah.
the Astro Boy one. That's how long that would take to come back, and then something would be behind something else. So I'd
Yeah.
go back to wireframe mode and put it back like 1, 2, put it back 2 shapes, and then
Oh my god.
just
And I
Was there
I knew
any
nothing.
point when you were sort of like, maybe I'll just go back to the hand drawn
Pen and ink.
And draw,
or
right?
you had so much time invested in it, maybe.
I had so much time invested. I
Yeah.
mean, that was the
I
one
know
that
that
was
feeling.
digital, that I was so invested, and I was just convinced that this was the only way to get the kind of color I wanted. So like to get full crazy, really bright RGB-ish color.
Yeah.
And then so anyway, then I sent that file to them on these big drives, and they called me and they're just like, "You're crashing everything. Like it's
You
destroying
broke the internet.
you broke the thing, like,
Pre-internet.
yeah.
He
So
broke the flux capacitor.
yeah.
I knew nothing about any of this. I just remember us having a conversation about some ideas for the next thing or whatever, and I don't really remember how in depth it went. I just kinda trusted
Well, you
Jeff.
were busy being a snowboarder though.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
this
you had
Yeah,
a
was
like
job.
you we
was
would I
at
remember
home stuff.
we would speak very briefly and you'd say, "Yeah, I got these ideas." I go, "Yeah, like I'm into this and this." He's like, "Yeah, okay, I got it." And then he would just kinda because he knew me, he wasn't just
Yeah.
some artist. Like we were friends that we would skateboard together all the time and hang out. And
Yeah, and it
so
was you were just
so
making
Meanwhile,
stuff
just
that
Jeff's
it was
like
like,
punching his computer like, dude, it won't
I
render.
know, but I do
No
remember
reviews.
I do remember that him
yeah.
talking about this. I have a very, very faint memory of him talking about this new computer digital thing. Because at school, we got these computers and I'm doing it all on my computer. I was like, "Okay." And I just didn't know. I was like, "Oh, whatever." And then but when I saw the board, when it first came out and they sent me my first board, I remember being just blown away at how crisp everything looked, like the lines, the colors. It's the TV, it has sort of like a TV, like the color bars
Test
and then
pattern,
with
yeah.
Oh yeah.
test pattern and then me flying over it, and I remember it just had this 3D kind of feel to it, and I was blown away. I was pretty pumped that was
And
gonna be
that's
my
like,
next board.
yeah, no, and those tools, and you think at that time, like, it was like the first version of Illustrator. So crispy, colorful, like now we're immune to it. It's like a problem. Like everything looks the same. But at that
Yeah.
time, it was so early that there was this like, it was this sort of uncanny valley of like, how did this happen? Like
Yeah.
it was, and that was sort of like, it was like rave culture. And there was all this fast moving culture that was happening simultaneously in the early 90s. Like, like it's an astounding time, and part of it is because there were people making stuff that was pretend digital and actual digital stuff, but like the visuals were all like melting together, and yeah, so it was like a very dynamic time graphically. And I was willing to do that because I wanted to tap into what I felt like this is gonna look crazy. Like
Eh,
that time I think I was going to ASR, and like, I knew, like, what to want out of it. Like, I didn't want it to look homemade or
yeah,
like, before looking
You
homemade was
felt it
cool,
was
now it was
Yeah.
gonna Yeah, you felt it was gonna really stand out.
yeah.
and it
Yeah.
did, and it
And it
did,
did.
and what's ironic is now your art, and even when you went down through the stuff you did with Girl Chocolate and everything, you started reverting back to doing this more
Yes.
organic, homegrown, artisanal kind of style art, that is, and it's just kind of funny. But yeah, like during the 90s, like it really reflected Jeff's graphics and his artwork that went on my boards and then the other boards was it was paralleling what we were going and what we were going through in snowboarding, like we were
Yeah.
pushing boundaries style wise, tricks wise, personality wise, and Geoff was really pushing the graphics to be on the forefront of that, which was, I mean, I was really, really stoked to have my name be associated with any of that. I still am. I'm still pretty happy that I have those boards.
Yeah, just so you guys know, like once we dropped that original snowboard graphics episode, so many people were in the comments like snowboard graphics are really emotional, like people
Yeah,
really remember them. And so people were commenting on all their favorites, and there was a bunch of people that called out your boards, and they weren't
Yeah.
calling out like the Sledgehammer, the Astro Boy. Like I don't think anyone even thinks about it that way, but just that your name and those graphics like made a I don't know, they
Mark.
made an impression, which is really cool, but I did wanna like, going back to some of the themes that were present, Tricia and I were, like, just on the other day looking through all the graphics, and it feels like there's an evilness to them. There's, like, a
A
sinister
sinister.
a sinister quality, which
yeah,
knowing where was that intentional? And I feel like some of it could be just a symptom of, like, the industry itself, like, we were subversive a little bit. Is that do you remember, like, was that intentional or it
Or are we just reading into it?
no,
are
I,
we
I
just high?
I think no, I think it was very for the time, like just, what we were talking about earlier with we were trying to push boundaries and
Yeah.
stand apart from skiing. And I think we also kind of just embraced the fact that we were the stepchild of snow sports because in the early 90s, skiers and snowboarders really didn't get along very well.
You're ruining our
And
moguls.
yeah, well, ski resorts didn't like us. We were loud, we were obnoxious, and we were because fuck it.
Well,
We wanted to
We were
be
also
our
like
own
'Cause
12.
we were
thing.
young.
Yeah, we were also kids, and so yeah, so when the graphics, Geoff can speak to that. It's just I think it just was a complete reflection on who we were and where we were in that time. Geoff?
yeah, I mean, I think
Just
you,
like, no, actually, Boyer is very sinister and there's a dark side to him. You're all
Right,
welcome. I
yeah,
showed
Yeah,
you.
'cause it's
yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde, right?
I mean, all those graphics is just coming up with, just coming up with graphics was, um, there was no direction, right? Like there was no even like sort of like brand identity, I would say. So it
Yeah.
was sort of like this nether zone. Like I knew John and I knew, and for John, it was just like, let's make something like you make something for your friend that your other friends will like, right?
That's
So that's
Yeah.
cool.
like the
Yeah,
easiest layer. Like we were making it for our world, like just our literal community where it's like I wanted those boards to hang in the snowboard shop and for other people to go to the snowboard shop who I knew to like them. And that's actually
yeah,
a very high bar, it turns out,
Yeah.
because we were
The
living in
highest,
Calgary, which was
really.
like yeah, it's like the
Yeah.
highest. Like, so it's like start at the core and then you work your way out, right? But in reality, if I look back at what it was like, what's the farthest thing from stripes or just putting your brand
Yeah.
on the board?
right.
Kemper. Like, what's the opposite of that? To tell a
Yeah,
story, right? So it's like a little story. So in the board, it's like tell a little story, like it's a little angel, a little devil, like simple story, like good and evil. Or like it's like that guy, it's not like just a guy with a hammer, like guy with a hammer. It's like, no, he's hitting this thing. He's like, oh, there's action and
It's a
oh, it's like a
dynamic
character. He's
moment.
got this
Yeah.
hammer. Like, and then it's drawn in a specific style. So the style was this sort of fantastical cartoon style. So if you break it down, all these things happening, it's like, oh, that's from a world. Like the drawing style was key. I didn't draw like that. It was like a made up way to draw. Like I drew like a guy would draw for Jon Boyer. And then I didn't draw the other board. Like
Ah.
I drew that like something else. So one's
Oh, that's
scratch
cool.
board, one's computer, super clean computer. Also, like Orsan's like the first one's handmade, do a computer one. It's a different character, but it's still the same sort of face. So I was doing sort of like sophisticated stuff, but it's all stuff I learned that I was taught through what I was seeing. And
Hmm.
I didn't learn it from K2, right? I learned it from, vision.
Jim
Yeah,
Phillips and shit. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
like from Jim
yeah,
Phillips, like those guys who are, again, they're men. They were like grown up
Yeah.
commercial artists operating at the highest level, right? So like that's the thing I think it's funny. Like we were kids, but we were like what we aspired to turns out to be like actually these auteurs of marketing and graphics and storytelling, right? And those
Yeah.
were our teachers. skiing didn't have those teachers. What they had were corporations. So they were
Yeah.
like developing technology, basic stuff and edges and
They
race
learned it
team,
from
race.
us later.
Yeah.
And then, yes.
No, they
And then they
did.
had, but they still haven't learned it because I work in the ski industry and and you go like, you can't like pretend like
Yeah.
it's hard, right? So you have like
Mhm.
skier run ski companies that are awesome and they just
course.
they grew up like snowboard, but the ones like the sort of the big dogs, it's hard. And I think that in any industry like snowboarding, once it starts to be about like technology and all these other things, you then lose the spirit, which we got in spades. But
Yeah.
that's a hard thing you can't fake that, right?
Yeah.
But that's definitely what that time of graphics reflected. And I think like what I was doing with Jon, like people in Colorado, everyone was sort of doing a version of it, I would say.
I was just gonna say, to add in what Geoff was saying about, the marketing and building all this, it's like, I think just to kind of parrot that, but back then there wasn't really, and correct me if I'm wrong, how you might see it, but it wasn't really about branding. Like, like now it's about building the brand.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like that's what we were doing at all. We were like, okay, it has to have the claw on there because that's the company's logo. And it was kind of, in the early 90s, the claw was really cool. It was this cool looking thing.
It
But
was one of the
yeah,
coolest for sure. Yeah.
it just wasn't about branding, it was about who we were and just how we saw
Or like the
our
writers
environment
made
around
the
us.
brand. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Well,
it ended up sort of funneling down to that, but it wasn't
well,
our
what it
intention.
was though, it's like what you're describing is actually a very super complex, sophisticated version of branding, which now everyone aspires to. It's like influencers or
Mhm.
something where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's just people. Wait, this is from this guy. It's
It's like
Jon.
a
Jon gave me.
backhanded, yeah.
Yeah, like it
Yeah,
wasn't about me as the graphic designer, it was about you. So people just
Yeah.
felt like they were getting a piece of Jon. And
Yeah.
that's why they're gonna respond in the comments like, oh, like to any of these boards from that time, because it felt like, wait, Jeff Brushing made that, right? Like
Or
there
like
was
right.
it
It's
was
icing.
him.
so much of
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
it was
the
so much of
Sean
him.
Palmer, like he really understood so well. Like he had his tattoos were, he was linking up
Totally.
what his tattoos were and his passion for like vintage caddies and
Catalogs.
all this stuff
Yes.
was
Yeah.
coming together in the board graphic, which,
Yeah.
like he carried through a bunch of boards and stuff. So that was really sophisticated and it came out of
Mhm.
nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like the best version. Like I think that's like the best version of branding. Like something like it's like all you're trying to do is connect and like
Mhm.
connect with people.
Yeah. And inspire them.
Yeah.
Boyer, you hinted at this earlier, but there was a version of sort of a pro model of yours that dropped before your like actual pro model that was it was kind of like the claw on like a brown background and then it had your
Yeah.
signature
They
on the
they threw
bottom
it,
and
which
you
was
said
it
that you
wasn't
didn't
even my
even know that was going
signature.
to happen.
No, I didn't know anything about it. I think we were talking about doing a pro model, which I was like 17, I think at the time. Was I
Oh, we were
17 or
wondering. Okay.
I don't even know if I was 17 or 18, however old I was. I guess I could do the math with the 90s. But I was like, yeah, cool, because I didn't know shit about how this worked. And then they just sent me these boards and I go, what the fuck are these? First I see my name on a board and I think that's cool. But then I looked at the board and went, that's not cool. Cause
Less cool.
I just didn't like the board and I thought it was ugly and it
Yeah.
didn't last very long. I said, I don't want to do this. That's when I was really pushing. Like if this is going to be me, I want it to be me. And,
Did that board get sold or was it just a sample? Or it's out there because yeah, that's where I found it was on eBay.
most of my shit on eBay.
No, that's where we find all the graphics.
Just in somebody's, basement somewhere going, what the fuck is this? Let's get rid of it on eBay.
No, honestly, for our research, yeah, we're like, oh, we can't find any of the old graphics. And we're like, go on eBay. We're like, oh, that was 85. That was 87.
Right.
Like everything is on
Spot
eBay.
on.
It's not just you.
Yeah.
I have, and I'll send you, I'll take some photographs of because I know that the high roller one, my last board is kind of tricky to find, but I
I
have
finally
like
did
I have
find
two
it, but
brand
yeah.
new ones. Yeah.
Oh,
And
sick.
that one I was so stoked on because I had like a Canadian flag with the claws, the maple leaf, and I was just like, Geoff came up with that.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Did you come up with that, or was it my idea? I don't know. Doesn't matter at this
I
point, does it?
remember really liking that, but that was like I was already in California then. I think I had
Yeah,
gone to
and
grad,
that
and I
It
yeah,
had
you'd
like
remember
gone
a
to grad
being
Shaft
school.
vibe.
I think
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, it had a very sort of like Shaft high roller kind of vibe to it, and the lowrider cars. We were all listening to like hip hop at the time, like 90s
And
hip hop
yeah.
and rolling dice, shit like
It
that.
is cool
But
though, the themes carried forward, because there is like
yeah,
there's like the little evil Boyers in there and
yeah,
stuff.
and
So
each one of the boards still has a little hammer guy somewhere on it. Like
yeah.
even the Astro Boy one, there's a little hammer guy
Yeah.
on near
I
the
was
bottom
building
of
your
it.
brand
But
and then you just quit.
he was building my brand, and then I quit. I got burned out, man. I got so burned out. I think my last year as a pro, I went to Japan and back 4 times. I
Oh.
think I rode 200 and something days. I was
Oh,
so
damn.
burned out.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was just really tired and sick, and I kinda just didn't. I don't know, I can't remember why, but I wanted to start making films
You're
or
like,
something.
what's next? Yeah.
I was just kinda done, you know? But I didn't hold on as long as Todd did. I think
You didn't
Todd's
hate
Still
still
it.
holding
crushing
on.
it.
He's still crushing it, man. He's like
Yeah.
the perpetual teenager. I admire him so much because I don't know how he keeps going. It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Tricia,
Ye
tell Boyer about camp and the first time you saw him.
Oh, okay. So
Was I an asshole?
1989.
Was I an
No, of
asshole? You're
course
gonna
not.
tell me an
No.
asshole story because I get a lot of those. I
You
was an
do? No.
egotistical
No.
I was an
No.
egotistical prick. I know that. So,
No. 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 I went to Blackcomb for summer snowboard camp in 1989.
mhm.
And you and Dano were my coaches, and is that possible? We rolled
Yeah,
into summer camp, and it was like flew across the country. I'm from the East Coast, from Connecticut, right?
yeah.
Fly across, land in Vancouver, get on a random bus, arrive in Whistler. They're like, check into the Hotel Blackcomb, and then I was like, roll
I know.
out. Like everyone's
What
partying, everyone's like
I
17,
know.
pretending to be 19, raging. And then, like, you and Dano were my coaches, but I swear I never saw you as a coach. Like, I just saw you on the hill, and we're like, all right, I guess we'll just get our lift tickets and get on the mountain.
Just start
And
riding.
That sounds
hopefully,
like summer snowboard camp in 1989. That sounds exactly like when you think about the fact that hundreds of kids would just be flown with no
yeah,
supervision to land in
maybe
another country, city, wherever, and then some people that were maybe even 30 years
Also
old at the
children.
time
oh,
were
I
or
doubt
like
it.
younger, like Ken Ock. I don't know how old Ken Ock was at the time, but like, and we're gonna care for all these children, and you're gonna pay us money. And I mean, it was the
And
Yeah.
best
I,
times. I will still to this day say that the early 90s is above and beyond the best time in snowboarding ever. Still to
yeah.
this day,
And just
you know, like
wildness, like you said, like,
yeah,
oh, arrive at the Vancouver International Airport from, JFK, and then figure it the fuck out, get up
get on
there
this
on your
shuttle.
own, you 14-year-old or 13-year-old, and arrive
We're,
in a village and check into a hotel, and then, like,
Here's
the
a
whole
beer.
floor,
yeah,
yeah, it was
here's a
like
beer. The
all the
drinking
East
age
Coast
is
shredders. Oh,
19.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I
That
can't
is the
remember.
first time
Were
I
you
got drunk.
alone? Were you? Yeah. That was the first time I got a lot of kids drunk.
Um,
Was your brother with you, or was it
No, my
just?
brother was with me, and then, like, Russell was there,
Yeah,
Winfield, like, Mike
yeah.
Lavecchia, like, Mike Tedesco. There was a whole crew of East Coasters,
That's
but, like,
right. I
Doug and I
remember.
flew there just us 2, and I'm like, "This is wild." But again, like, parents are just like, "I paid for the,
I
deposit.
know.
Take my kids."
Here you go.
And now
Yeah.
you can't do anything without like
I know.
4
You're
release
tracking
forms
them.
and like backup, emergency contacts for everything. It's just, back then it was just like
Yes.
hop in a station wagon with somebody smoking a cigarette and you're
Yeah.
fine.
You're good. No
It was
seatbelts.
there
Yeah.
wasn't much supervision going down in the
I
80s and
did
90s,
learn a
that's for
lot,
sure.
so
No.
thank you. I didn't learn anything on the hill, but I learned a lot about life at summer
Right,
camp that
right.
year.
Perfect. My work is done here.
Yeah, your
Yeah.
legacy moves on. Well, I
It
did want to
lives on.
ask you guys how were the boards received? Like, did they sell? Do you
Ye-
remember?
y- Yeah. Yeah, it was the first time I ever made any money in my life, and much to my parents' chagrin, I took my first royalty check, 'cause royalties was like a big
Yeah.
thing back then, And I got my first royalty check, and I went out and bought a Jeep Grand Cherokee with cash up front, just boom. And I
All
went home,
right.
and my
Talk about high
parents were
roller.
just, I was like, I bought a Jeep Cherokee, and my parents were pissed. Like, they were like, what are you doing? Where did you, they didn't really understand what, and so it was the first time I made pretty good money. And that was when nobody was really making money, because I remember back then the snowboard companies would only pay you for the winter months.
Oh,
They wouldn't
right.
pay you for the summer months because it wasn't this thing. So
Like you're
Wait, they
a
you'd
paid
have,
you? Just kidding.
yeah, well, I get like, I
Jen
remember
and I are like, what?
at first I think it was something like, I think it was, I would get paid a salary of like, say, $1,200 a month for the winter months.
Dude,
When you're
that's
like
pretty good for the early 90s.
17, 18, it was great. And then, but yeah, the first royalty check, my hammer board sold a lot. I don't know
Amazing.
if,
Do you know
I
how
don't
many
know,
what a lot would be? Like how many
Yeah.
boards?
I don't remember the exact number. I just remember I got like, I remember 4 really substantial checks. And so I sort
It
of
had to
based
be
it off of that.
in the thousands then. I
Yeah,
don't
it
know.
was
Yeah.
quite a few, but then it tapered off pretty quick, because then all of a sudden all these other boards are coming out, and there
Right.
were other companies were doing it, and so that's when brand loyalty started becoming a really big thing. Like, you were either into Sims, or you were into Barfoot, or you're,
Yeah.
Burton or whatever. But I don't know if Geoff, if you ever heard anything about the sales or anything after you delivered the art.
No, I don't. I mean, like again, I had a child mind, so I didn't care.
Yeah.
You're
But
like, all right, that's done.
yeah, I also had very little contact with anybody. Like it was slow. It
Sure.
was slow contact. It was just fax. There was no email. I maybe got my first email. Like I had an AOL account, maybe. I maybe had an AOL account.
Yeah.
That around 1990. But
I think that's early, because I think I sent my
Yeah.
first email in like 1996,
Me too.
maybe.
oh really?
So
Wow.
you're an
Yeah.
early
Oh, I was
adopter,
early.
Jeff.
I mean, I was
Yeah.
making computer graphics in
True.
in
Yeah.
90,
Yeah.
like 90, what was it,
He was
91?
on the forefront of technology with
Cutting
graphics.
edge.
Come on,
And then
like
he
cutting
threw it
edge.
away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
threw it
I
away.
did.
Now he goes, I'm
Yeah,
going to go right back to watercolors.
yeah. Um,
Jeff, how much do you remember what you got paid to do it?
I remember, I mean,
Does
no, I
Boyer owe
don't.
you some
But
of those royalty cash?
I would say
Very much.
I probably got paid $500, $1,000.
Oh man.
No,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
that
like, but
sounds right.
this
Yeah.
is the thing though, that's crazy is like, that's sort of like what, like board graphics and like once I started working at skateboarding and stuff, like the $500 to $1,000 range was like what you get paid to do anything. Like do a
Yeah.
t-shirt, $500, do a board
Yeah.
graphic, $1,000. And the sad thing is like that sort of hasn't changed.
I
Like
believe
I
Oh,
it.
it's
still
still
do
that
jobs.
much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Oh
I've had
wow.
somebody emailing me like right now who's like, yeah, man, can you resend that invoice? It's for $500. This is in my inbox right now.
Except now,
That's
Geoff,
so
you
sad,
yourself are kind of a brand. You're not even kind of
Yeah.
a brand. You are a brand now.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I have a
Okay.
hard time believing that you're still getting that. We want Geoff McFetridge to do a t-shirt for us. Here's $500.
Hey, it's $500. It's for a mural. So
But yeah, right.
it's for a
But
non.
back
It's like a
then,
nonprofit. It's a nonprofit.
17 years
It's a
old, and he's,
nonprofit.
my stuff's going to be on a board and whatever. Like, that's just like,
But
for you as an artist, that's really cool. For me as a snowboarder, it's really cool. We didn't really think about it, the money thing, until I actually got
no,
paid.
but it was. But then also, like, I was living in with my parents, and so like getting a check for $700 was a huge amount of money. But I will say, so second time around, I'm a year older. I get asked to do all the graphics. And this is my memory is like being with like I had sort of a mentor, Michelle Claro, who was like a young instructor at the Alberta College of Art. And he was sort of took me under his wing a little bit, and I was helping him with his projects, and he would help me with my stuff, whatever. And
Yeah.
I told him like, oh, I just got asked to do all these graphics for this company. And they're saying, what'll it cost? And he said, ask for $15,000. And to me, I was just like,
You're high.
you're out of your mind.
They're going to
Like,
tell me
what
to
are you
fuck off.
talking about? Yeah, they're going to tell me to fuck off. Like, that's Grand Cherokee money, right? So anyway, I just like made a super professional invoice, like a super professional looking he showed me how to do it. Like I made
Yeah.
a letterhead and
In
a big
Illustrator.
sheet in Illustrator and with nice fonts, and sent it to them or whatever, faxed it to them. And they just said, okay. So the Barfoot
Should have gone for
graphics,
20.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
exactly right. It
But
is.
again, being early, and I've had this experience in other industries too, when they don't know, like when companies don't know, what do we pay for a shoot collab? And you go like, it's really expensive. Before they realize it's like, oh, we don't pay you at all to do a shoot collab, right?
Yeah.
So if that's sort of the era. So basically that paid for my MFA. Like I went to Cal Arts and got my master's degree, and I got a scholarship that paid for it, and the other half was paid by Barfoot. And my parents paid for my living expenses, which was really no cheap.
That's
It was like
awesome.
$500 a month. So it's like really similar.
Beautiful. That's how it
Substantial.
should be, right?
It's totally how it should be, and
Yeah.
sort of changed my life. So thank you, John.
Yeah.
Well,
Aw.
your bill is in the mail. I'll just
Bill is in the mail. The Jeep
Yeah.
Cherokee's in the mail.
You still
Yeah.
have that, right?
Oh yeah, somewhere burning in the back of somebody's backyard or something.